Hello fellow artists, and welcome to my first video on this channel. In this video, I will share my story as a classically trained artist who lost sight of his passions and now, in his 30s, is going all in on following and pursuing those passions. Let's get into it. So, thank you all for joining me. My name is Epitome, and while I share my story with you, I will be working on the illustration for our channel logo, focusing on my pen name character, Epitome. I roughed out this illustration on Bristol board using blue lead, sent the picture of that rough sketch over to the iPad Pro here, and we will now finalize the details using Procreate and Apple Pencil. So, as I previously mentioned, I'm a classically trained artist, which is really just a fancy way of saying I attended art school for 6 years, studying everything fine art related, including things like drawing, painting, sculpture, photography, printmaking, and digital media. I'm currently in my 30s, and like most young artists, as life ramped up, I walked away from my passions in art and gaming to pay the bills and put food on the table. I was working the traditional 40-hour work weeks in IT, managing the misery that comes with that life. However, through a disagreement I had with the vice president of the company I worked for, we agreed that that position wasn't a good fit for me or that company, and I walked away. While thinking about what my next move would be, I began drawing again in my free time. This got me thinking, how could I create a place where artists of all ages could come together, share their work, and inspire one another? How could I create this place while also sharing my passions for art, sharing what I've learned not only from art school but throughout my years as an artist, continue to play games to inspire my artwork, all while making a living? So, I sat down, brainstormed for a few weeks, planned it out, and launched this channel. This is my first ever video, and I'm still learning, so I plan to get better, I promise. But now that you know what I want this channel to be, let me take you back to the very beginning of my creative journey. My journey began 28 years ago in a daycare I had attended. I wasn't old enough to stay at home and take care of myself yet, so my mom put me in daycare, and one day, this daycare arranged a field trip to a place called Artist for a Day. This was a place where you could go in, pay a flat rate, and paint any household item, including things like bowls, cups, and plates. The business would then fire the painted item in the kiln, and you could take the finished product home. So, I picked up a paintbrush, picked out a bowl, and got to work. Now, you'd have to ask my mom how hideous that bowl was. But what stuck with me was the utter amazement after we had walked into all those white items, and when I left, I had created a one-of-a-kind item with nothing but my hands and some paint. This was the magic. As life progressed, I continued to draw all the time like most kids do, carrying that magic from Artist for a Day with me, until something huge happened in September of 1998. Pokemon launched in North America. A few months later, I would get Pokemon Red for my 5th birthday, choose my Charmander, because there is no other right choice, and proceed to completely fall in love with Game Boy, Nintendo, and Pokemon as a whole. After spending hours finding and catching Pokemon on Game Boy, I grabbed some paper out of my mom's printer and spent even more hours drawing each and every Pokemon I had found that day. My dad and I would go to Toys R Us every Friday to get Pokemon cards and the newest guide for the games, which would be filled with priceless Ken Sugimori artwork. On weekdays, I'd go to school, find out what Pokemon my friends had caught that I hadn't, and draw them. I'd come home, do it all over again. This was it. I was hooked, and my life from then on would constantly blur the lines between art and gaming. I would start my career in gaming with Pokemon Red, of course, but there were many other games in those early years that would spark my creativity. Super Mario World would introduce me to Mario and all of his characters. Donkey Kong Country would be a game my mom and I would play for hours trying to get each new exciting level. I recall playing these terrible Batman and Spawn games on SNES with my cousins, and even though the games were very rough, they did introduce me to American comics from DC and Dark Horse. As the N64 came out, my mom and I would play things like Turok, Kirby, Hot Wheels, and for the first time, I would get introduced to The Legend of Zelda. Before this, I had heard of Zelda on the SNES, but I wouldn't get to play my first Zelda game until Ocarina of Time. I was in awe running around as Link, trying to find a sword and shield to finally get around Mido and see what was behind him. However, the one Nintendo game that would even further solidify my being a die-hard fan of the company to this day would lead me to many more gaming and drawing opportunities would be a little game I found in a crate at the daycare I told you about earlier, Super Smash Bros. I put that cartridge in that N64, and suddenly I was greeted with all the characters I had learned to adore up until this point, pitted against one another in all-out fighting mayhem. It was awesome, and I would use the in-game models to get these characters in unique poses to draw later on. I would play games on my mom's SNES and draw what I saw. I would play games on my N64 and draw what I saw. On the weekends, I would beg my older brother to rent a GameCube from Blockbuster so I could play some new games I hadn't played yet to build that mental bank of awesome scenes and characters to draw afterward. System after system, game after game, drawing after drawing. I didn't know it at the time, but I was building two passions that would not only feed off one another, but would ultimately lead to life-changing decisions I would make 20 years later. As middle school began, I made new friends who had systems outside of Nintendo, and I was introduced to another form of art that would continue to inspire me to draw every day: anime. For those that don't know, anime is simply a form of Japanese cartoons. However, they were usually aimed toward teenagers and were generally much darker than traditional American cartoons. The art for these shows was usually much more hand-drawn and less CGI or fancy animation techniques, which fascinated me. I was obsessed with the artwork in these shows, and it would eventually lead to my love for manga, Japanese culture, Japanese games, and trying to figure out how it was all drawn and created. When high school rolled around, I was finally able to start taking some more serious art classes: AP art study, black and white photography, composition. And I was able to start entering art shows, not only to share my artwork, but also to get feedback from people years older than me who had learned more than I had at the time. This was invaluable, and after winning a few awards, I decided I would go to college and study art even further. So, I packed up my PS3, my 3DS, my sketchbook, and headed to university. Once on campus, I was in heaven, surrounded by artists, art professors, who were professional artists themselves, and all the materials I would need to explore everything I couldn't in my high school. I would learn how to participate in group critiques, meet deadlines, see how certain art was made, and of course a load of new skills to create with. I would create my first clay and metal sculptures, learn how to weld, how to work with oil paints and solvents, how to build and prepare canvases, how to organize and open a gallery show, how to work at much larger scales than my high school sketchbooks, and how to use my observational drawing studies to inform my personal, more creative drawings. I would make new friends, meet my now wife, acquire a mentor, and pull a lot of all-nighters. After 6 years of studying and creating art during the day and playing through countless unforgettable gaming experiences at night, I would head home and begin to worry about things like rent, car payments, feeding myself, and of course, buying games. Now, normally this would be where a college student would look for a job in their field of study, and of course I did the same. But as time went on and I began to add more and more financial responsibilities, the prospect of showing my artwork in galleries, making the artwork at the scale I wanted, and finding a place to store the artwork would fade further and further away. I took countless jobs, doing anything that would allow me to fund my gaming while keeping my bills paid, until I realized I wasn't drawing, I didn't have the energy to play the games I did buy, and I had lost everything that made me, me. So, here I am, making this video as a promise to that 4-year-old who found the magic in an artist for a day all those years ago, that we will continue to create, inspire, game, and enjoy the things we spend our remaining precious time on. I also make this video as a promise to those who watch it, that life doesn't have to be so dark, that you aren't alone, that there's always time to find and follow your passions, and that this channel is for you. So let's create together. With all that being said, if you want to join me on this journey and surround yourself with artists, gamers, and people trying to follow their passions, please subscribe for weekly art and gaming videos. Thank you all for giving my story a listen, and until next week, find the magic and never let it go. Goodbye.